Pontiff and the Princess. One of the beautiful things about Miyazaki's world is it's a fantasy world. And so there are fantasy elements that we are just supposed to accept. He doesn't explain them. And so, just as we are supposed to accept that the fire comes out of nothing or always existed and was discovered originally, we are also supposed to accept that worlds exist within paintings. Not any painting. Paintings painted with souls and blood. And so, we talk about the painted worlds in Pontiff. In Dark Souls 3, we encounter the second painted world we've ever seen, the painted world of Ariandel. Painted worlds are peaceful. They're different than the rest of the world. Painted worlds are a place of refuge for those who don't belong anywhere else and have lost their purpose. And so, whether you are a member of an ancient kingdom, an ancient brotherhood that fought against dragons, who fought against the abyss, who returned to find your brothers gone and all their armor remaining, and had no reason to stay in the world. Whether you'd lost somebody so incredibly important to you that you had no reason to continue on, or whether you followed mighty warriors, watching them closely, seeing if they were going to give in to the very thing they fought against, like the followers of the Abyss Watchers. Or whether you are royalty of the gods, removed from your place of belonging, from your people. The painted worlds are for you. But the important thing to understand about the painted worlds is they are painted with something real. This is not some world that is a painting. It's a real world made with souls. And so, the unique thing about the painted worlds is not only is it a refuge to those who need a place of refuge, people can be born there. People can live there. And so while the painted world is for those without purpose, some are born and live and die. And some are born in these painted worlds, learning the culture of these worlds, but have not experienced the loss, which allows the painted world to be a place of escape. And this is where we meet the sorcerer, Sullivan. Sullivan was born in a painted world, raised in a painted world, mastered their magics, their ice sorceries. But he did not sense the same emptiness that keeps those there hiding away from the outside world. And so, as the painted world can be entered into for various reasons, it can also be escaped by those who don't want to be there. So Sullivan exits the painted world and finds the city of Irithyll. Immediately after the fall of its position in society, Aldrich had forcefully, most likely, been burned on the altar, having not desired the Age of Fire to continue. He still was burned. His soul was still burned. And so we assume that the mighty leader of this church, the Church of the Deep, was burned on the altar by others and buried. And as the city begins to fall in power, having lost some of their most mighty men, and Lothric has begun to rise, we see the Pontiff Sullivan, somebody who doesn't have meaning yet, but doesn't have a lack of meaning, discovers Irithyll and lives there. Underneath Irithyll, there are dungeons. These dungeons are unique. They lead down and down and down. And so it is said that Sullivan explored the dungeons, and much like our player, as we travel through, arrives in the profaned capital. This is not the same capital that Yorm knew. Yorm knew a mighty city, one rich in wealth, but fighting for its own survival. And Yorm spent his life and soul to defend and protect it. But the capital that Sullivan finds is different. It's been devastated by an event. It's been burned, its treasures melted, its corpses roasted, and the few remaining citizens in worship of an item called the Profane Flame. This awakens something in Sullivan. Sullivan, who had no purpose before this point in time, desires power. He captures the flame, makes it his own, and this ignites in him a desire for power. And so, as Irithyll is falling, and as Lothric is rising in power, and the worship of the gods is growing, and as the Church of the Deep, being connected to Irithyll in its establishment, would be shrinking in power, he takes this power, takes over the rule and reign of the church. The interesting thing about Sullivan is we never actually see a faithfulness and a desire for anything but power. Where Aldrich knew and believed in the deep, Pontiff Sullivan, who forcefully takes over the church, doesn't seem to. He wants power. And it would seem, because of the lack of commitment described through the items, it's not there. We don't see a belief in the end result of the deep, just a desire for power. It would seem that he's using it as a vehicle for his own goals, and that being simply power. And so, Pontiff begins to spread the doctrine of the deep into the kingdom of Irithyll. Mind you, Irithyll is gaining power, and it is the ruling and reigning kingdom, and the fire has burned bright. And so we don't have the situation that we as the players see, where Lothric is devastated. We see Irithyll shrinking, we see Lothric rising, but men are alive and well, because the fire is burning. And so, the doctrine of the Church of the Deep spreads to the people more and more and more. He uses and trains the evangelists to go to the cities of men. Lothric cannot win if the people believe in the deep and do not worship the gods. And so he seeks to spread this. Meanwhile, you have the Queen of Lothric and Osiris, the king. Lothric has an ancient history of desiring power and strength, and we see it as our player character at one point as the Unkindled Ash travels back in time, which we will discuss. We see that even our player served this kingdom in an ancient age before it was the kingdom of power. There is a history in Lothric of desiring strength and perfection, and so King Osiris, seeking to have the strongest kingdom and the strongest sons, even goes to places forbidden, goes to Archdragon Peak, seeking more power, seeking to be the strongest. While he's in Archdragon Peak, he learns that men can transform. But not being satisfied with the way that the adherents of this dragon faith transform, he desires more power than even that. And so, he hides himself away from his kingdom, changing himself physically, and seeking, using forbidden arts learned from dragons, arts learned from studying Ulasil in Seath. We see Osiris still desiring more power. Osiris manages to create a portal that allows the travel to another time in the back of his hideaway. That leads us to even the Untended Graves. We can only assume he got not much further than that, because we see a defender in the Untended Graves. The Untended Graves tell us so much about the story of Dark Souls, because we have a time where the fire went out, and so it confirms what we learn in the other Dark Souls, that there are ages of light and ages of dark, and yet eventually the fire reignites, because during this time period, the Abyss was not a threat. There was only light, there was only dark. In the current time, there's three. The Abyss. And it's coming, and Aldrich told everybody, and Pontiff told everybody. We learn much about our player character here, and when we travel back in time to the Untended Graves, there's only one difference in the world. It's that where our player starts Dark Souls 3, instead of an empty tomb, we see a body inside the same coffin. We see our player character in an ancient age. We find a ring that says he served a queen of Lothric, and we find something amazing about the nature of these kingdoms, that they are shifting in power, that they overlap, and that they are in competition, and that the people of Lothric have always sought power, but not always had it. They've not always been the dominant kingdom. And so, Osiris is seeking that power. But whatever he's doing, whatever he desires to do in the past, he's prevented when our character destroys him. Meanwhile, Prince Lothric and Prince Lorien, his last two remaining sons, the one who has been prophesied to be, it's been foretold that he would be the next one to burn his great soul in the fire, but he's weak and crippled, likely because of his father's own experiments to make him great and mighty. And then we have his other son, the other twin prince, Lorien, who, while the prophecies are not about, is more fitting for the cause. But the love of Lothric and Lorien is great between each other. And so, they rule the kingdom. Lorien is known for his great deeds, slaying a demon prince, permanently wounding himself. But we have to remember the influence of the Church of the Deep. We learn from some flavor text that the first scholar, the closest scholar to the princes, whispered in their ears and told them that their efforts would be wasted, that lighting the flame would not matter. We see the church's influence in this kingdom, and as the king is gone, seeking power, the sons hear this doctrine. And while they are supposed to light the flame as it begins to fade, and as the undead manifest themselves, and as the kingdom falls apart, they've heard the Pontiff scholars and refuse to light the flame, locking themselves in their throne room and ignoring the world. And this is where the game Dark Souls 3 begins.